Good morning. I believe the judge is going to enforce these time standards, so let me get to the point. Let me start out by thanking each of you. Can y'all hear me? I'll use my outside voice. For your service. This has been a long trial. It's been a long trial for those of us who do this sometimes, and we appreciate your patience with me, our questions. I told you it was going to be a fight. Justice is only served if there's a fight through questions, and through this struggle, you decide. I also would like to say to Mr. Goodman and Mr. Box, we have been passionate in this case, and I commend you, and you've tried to do your job, and I've tried to do my job as professionals. Thank you, Judge, too, for your patience and sustainments. In this case, Karen and David Swift were married for a number of years. They were happy. They had 2 boys. They had a divorce. They had problems. They got back together. They had 2 daughters. They're in Dyersburg. David's working. Karen's doing her activities. David's working a lot. He's raising his family. As time moves into 2011, Karen Swift changed. And it's just a fact. And I'm not trying to trash her or trash David, but they grew apart. Other people got involved with activities that made him uncomfortable and some of her friends uncomfortable, that they backed away from her. And they talked about how they did things as families, and then it changed. We talked earlier about when you're in a relationship and somebody you believe is not being honest with you, sometimes you want to find out. You check on them, you ask them questions, and sometimes that happens. There's no violence. There may be questions, accountability. Hey, where are you going? It may get on the other one's nerves, but if somebody says they're going to go to Walmart and go shopping, and then in nighttime, and then it seems out of the ordinary, and then you go and they're not there, a lot of people in a relationship might want to know. There was no hitting, struggling. It was asking questions, and she didn't like it, and I guess Ms. Bona didn't, because they wanted to change. I mean, they wanted to do what they wanted to. But Karen Swift was not afraid of David Swift. You heard about another issue where she's parked at the mall and they see his car. Karen Swift asked the lady with her to flash the lights, and David Swift came over and they had a conversation. She wasn't afraid of him at all. She was a strong lady physically, and the prosecutors talk about control. They talk about him trying to control her, but really, did David Swift control her? She had another phone supplied by another couple. She went where she wanted to go. She had joint access to their bank account. And so, did he really have control? Because she went where she went, she did the behavior she wanted to, and that's just a reality. And as we move on closer to the time she got a divorce, she would come and go as she wished. Now, he might ask her questions. He might say, where are you going? He would go check on her, but there was no violence. She didn't like it. It got on her nerves. It got on her friends' nerves that she would be with at a party or what she was doing, but there was no violence. When she filed for divorce, she took the 2 girls, she filed. You heard from the lawyer. It was a contested divorce, and the grounds she filed for were irreconcilable differences and inappropriate conduct, not cruel and inhumane treatment, not physical violence. She went to her trip. David got informed by her. I submit that she came back. She came to the house. She stayed at the house. She wasn't afraid of him. Did David think maybe they could work it out again like they did the first time? Was he hopeful about that? Yes, I submit. In opening, the prosecutor said that David didn't even get an attorney. He said that. We know that through the divorce attorney that the state called that David did get an attorney. Attorneys don't come free, and he had to respond. And he was possibly trying to work it out, but protect himself. He wanted to see his girls. He didn't want to have custody, the majority, away from him. And yes, he was concerned about finances. And she had access to their finances. And the testimony that she cleaned his bank account out when she went to Alabama. He shared his money with her while she comes back home. They're in the home. They're trying to at least talk and work it out, and this goes on. Now, in a divorce, when you have grounds, the lawyers encourage, I submit from their witness, to kind of check up, see what's going on, because those things do matter. And we go on through the time in October. David injures himself. Mr. Summerfield doesn't have a dog in this fight. He wasn't a best friend of David Swift, the gentleman that he worked with that saw him injure himself. He doesn't have a dog in this fight. And he recalls that David Swift, the week before, looked down and depressed. If you care about somebody and it's not working out, you could be down and depressed. And even if you don't get along with them, you still may care about them, even if you don't understand them. But Mr. Summerfield doesn't have any reason to lie. He told you that. He knew that David Swift had been injured before, and a re-injury. The prosecutor would argue that this is a complete fake. He's already thinking about this. This is premeditation. Think about all the people that saw him with the immobilizer on his leg after that. Think about all the people that saw him with the crutches. You know, from some of these witnesses, when you deal with credibility of witnesses, we had a lot of witnesses in the state's proof that saw him with crutches and verified that he appeared to have a leg injury, a knee injury. When you ask questions of witnesses, you have to decide, too, some things. If one side asks questions of a witness, the prosecution, and they seem to understand all the questions and volunteer the information, and when the other side asks questions, well, what do you mean? I don't remember that, and you have to pull it out of them. It seems like they have an attitude or a bias, and you have to kind of decide if that gives weight to their testimony. And I'm just saying that's a reality. You'll have an instruction about witnesses, and you can disregard or take into consideration different parts of their testimony. We went through a lot of transcripts where when the prosecutors called them, they said something different. They said something a lot milder than what really happened. So you heard all that. I'm not going to go back through it all. And so you have to decide that in credibility. Now, we go on to around this time frame. David Swift's at home. His kids are at home. He's working. We got things going on in the neighborhood. We had issues with the dog killer. The neighbors, the Nafis, had that issue. They testified about the strangeness going on over there. From the officer, you heard about Mr. Hogshooter, and some of the issues over there with the dogs. And the Nafis told you that they lived next to David Swift, and you know that both of their dogs were injured. There's some strange things going on. Those are things you have to take in consideration. Now, in order to get to the point, as we move on into closer to this time frame, she's missing on that Sunday morning. David Swift talked to the police immediately. He agreed, and you saw the long interview the first day. He answered all their questions. I didn't do anything. They say it's self-serving. They're the ones that played it. And they say that he talks on, and people with domestic situations talk sometimes both sides about, well, let me make you understand why I'm okay, but they're doing wrong. And sometimes that's going on both sides. And he talks to them, he cooperates, he answers all their questions. Now, when she ends up missing, you remember the lady that testified, Miss Lamb, that David called looking to see that Sunday morning where she is? And she said he seemed genuinely surprised when she said her car is sitting up on Millsville Road with looks like it's flat, something wrong with it. The state said that Miss Bona called David, but David called her. He's looking. He goes, you hear from his daughter that testified what she remembered. She goes to the car. He takes the girls to Miss Lamb to be watched while he goes look. He goes to the car. He stops. He gets out. He checks on it. And then he gets back in the car and takes them to Miss Lamb. She watches them. He comes back. The Bonas are there. And then the officer arrives. Now, the Bonas said a little different things about this. And they're really involved in her life. They've got the Voyager phone records. They're watching what she's doing. They're paying her for the divorce. And I don't know, you have to take, I guess, their attitude or possible bias into consideration. David comes back. He cooperates. They look in the car. There's nothing in the car indicating something happened. David comes back. The officer takes him down to his house. They walk in through the garage. The officer doesn't smell or see anything out of the ordinary. He goes in the house. The officer looks at wherever he wants to go, and David allows him to. The officer sees a uniform and strikes up a conversation and implies that he's a human lie detector. And if somebody looks down when you say, well, some things about your wife, well, it's kind of depressing. It is kind of depressing if you're having problems, or if she's gone and you don't know where she is and her car's sitting out there. There's an emotional thing going on with him. You can't read somebody's mind. So you should consider these things. Anyway, David cooperates. They come to his house. They walk through his house. They look anything in his house. The prosecution says that he grabbed her out of the room and that she was under the influence. The medical examiner, when I asked him questions about that, she had these things in her system. He could not say what levels they were or what effect, because he didn't do that. He just sent them off to another lab. He couldn't say what effect or what levels. And if you recall, he couldn't say whether she took them that night or the night before. 24 hours. Remember what he said. And we know that she was going to get up and go back to Trimble. I don't know what her other plans were. The things on the phone or the camera, she just came from a party at the country club. She's there dressed up in her outfit with her friends. It's logical she would be bringing either a camera or have her phone with her. It's logical that Karen Swift would want to either her pictures, download those. So, and it's logical also that if she had her iPhone, if she's got a passcode, the 4-digit thing, you heard the testimony from Miss Bona that she was always changing her passwords and security things. How would he know? How would David Swift know? Now, the Voyager phone. There was a contact saved in David Swift's phone where that number had contacted him before. It said Billy Bona, the son of the Bonas. You saw in some of the messages yesterday where Karen texted saying, if my husband calls you and I called this number by mistake on my iPhone, it's my husband, and implying just act like you don't know what we're doing. That Voyager phone earlier, Karen, I submit, had used from, and maybe Billy Bona had it, but that's the contact ID that David Swift had in his phone around the Alabama trip. And so is she calling if her phone got cut off, if her bill wasn't paid by her, and she temporarily called from another phone? She's doing it with her iPhone. She's forgetting who she's calling, and that is only logical. Now, David, when he talked to the police, said apparently she's got a second phone that she's using all the time, but you recall what you heard from the tape. The state is saying that David Swift grabbed her out of her bedroom, tore her clothes off in that room. Nobody heard that in this house that was there, who was there. The clothes that they're talking about they weren't found there or anywhere. There's no evidence of a struggle in that room. You heard her daughter, who was there, and their son, who came the next morning. It didn't look out of the ordinary. You can look at those pictures over there about the nightstand. Nothing's in disarray. Is it an untidy place? There was a headboard, and everything was tested. There's nothing indicated that anything occurred in that room, I submit. The prosecutor is saying to you that he took her out in the garage with a knee injury on his left leg and stomped her head in the garage. If he has a knee injury, you can maybe think, is it possible that he could stomp her head? He's not going to do it with his injured leg, I would think. And is it possible that if he's going to use his right leg, that he can put enough pressure on his injured leg and stomp her head in, and she's just going to sit there and take it, a strong woman? There's no physical evidence in the garage. There's no blood in the garage. They imply that later they went out there and there's a picture showing bleach near a pool. This is October. Pools get closed. Bleach is used for pools. You heard Mr. Swift, Mr. Dustin Swift, testify about what their practice was about how they cleaned it. There's nothing in the pool that indicates that it was. We don't know anything about the inside of the pool because they didn't look. You got some bleach out near the pool or in some trash cans behind the pool, next to the pool. They had the opportunity to swab and test all these things because we know that the TBI, through Nathan Bishop, did a very thorough examination where they swabbed and took pictures and stains and fibers in the house, and there's nothing indicating it. They say he cleaned up in the garage. But if he cleaned up, they did find not human blood. They conclusively said it's not human blood. So if it's animal blood, I submit dog blood. Is that consistent with the dog being in there? Or the blood wouldn't even be in there, or would be so degraded that you couldn't even tell. You could see a presence of blood without making a conclusion that it's an animal. None of the things in the house verify anything that the state says about their theory of the case. David Swift had no marks or cut or bruises on him. He completely cooperated. He went the next days and the days following, and if they wanted to interview him, he sat and talked to them. And so you need to consider all this. the tires. We heard from two different individuals, Mr. Bolden. Mr. Bolden indicated, and he was honest about it, his opinion is based on the screw being in at an angle. He just doesn't believe that it could have happened on road conditions. But when asked, he says, it could happen, I don't think it did, but everything, the stars and the moons would have to line up for it to happen. Is that enough? Is that enough? When he made his opinion, he said, I had another case that involved this, and we did find a mechanism, an error mechanism to do this, that I could make that conclusion that that happened. There's no hammer, there's no screwdriver, there's no mechanism, there's nothing from David's house indicating that that happened. The screw is a rusty screw on the inside. There's no evidence taken from his house or garage that he even had any screws that were similar to that. Isn't that something that you would want to consider, to have the presence of mind, for your mind to rest easy? There's nothing. So you have Mr. Bolden saying that, and you have my tire expert, and he has extensive experience. He recreated an exact tire to do the testing and his conclusions. But Mr. Bolden admits that. The screw looks like it's old. It could have been picked up on the road, I submit. I don't know. I submit that the vehicle had a flat tire. Did Karen Swift leave and go out on the Millsville Highway and the tire went flat, and then she came back on the way to the house and it was so flat you just couldn't make it anymore? The state would have you believe that this long journey, we talked about the cell phone towers, we talked about the network extender. I submit to you, Mr. David Williams did a very good example of explaining this in a way that we can understand. He's been doing this for a number of years. He's, I would submit, a national expert. His opinion about the time frame that they left, it doesn't agree with the time frame that they say about committing the murder, loading a body up in her car, which there's no evidence of her car, going down to the cemetery, the Bledsoe Cemetery, almost 3 miles, parking the car, somebody that's injured. I'm not saying he's completely injured, but somebody that's injured, and a doctor said it, and physical therapy, and he eventually had to have surgery later, and then either pulling or grabbing her out of the back trunk or the passenger compartment, and he's, dragging the body. He set up a rough terrain, and then it would take a while. The person, if with his leg condition, it would take a while. And coming back and getting in the vehicle and then driving back, and the state would have you believe then coming to his own house and doing something to the tire, and then going back and parking the vehicle out there, and then walking back. This time frame just is not realistic. I don't know what happened. I know that we live in a world now that if a child's out playing in the yard and the parent goes into the house, that we don't know what could happen. We don't know what's lurking around, and things can happen. I can't explain it. The state has a theory and a suspicion. This theory and suspicion has to be proven beyond a reasonable doubt. We decide cases by proof, speculation, not the autopsy. Well, could she have been strangled? The state asked, and suggesting it happened. And then I asked a medical examiner, is there any proof of strangulation? No. So if if you say that she was strangled, wouldn't it, if you come to that conclusion, wouldn't you just be guessing? Yes. He said that. I asked him those questions. The blunt force trauma to the head, hard object. It would indicate a weapon. There was a hammer found out there at the cemetery. There's no indication that David Swift had anything to do with that hammer. I even subpoenaed the forensic scientists from the TBI to come in, the ones that they didn't bring in, to talk about what was done, like fingerprints and other things that either excluded David Swift. They also they mentioned Hog Shooter and took some examples from him. They didn't compare the fingerprints. They didn't compare any of the other the bonus. Their names are listed as a report as possibilities. They didn't test them. They just tested David Swift. They had tunnel vision and reasonable degree of medical certainty. How about a reasonable degree? That means you want to consider. And if there's 2 or 3 possible suspects and you're not sure, you want to at least do the testing to either eliminate or confirm. Nothing's been done that confirms that David Swift, through science, through any blood, DNA, fingerprints, fiber, and the prosecutor started his case out saying there is no proof scientifically or forensically, and so you have to consider all these things. Now, suspicion, or I don't like somebody, or a theory. They have a suspicion or a theory. As far as proof, it's beyond a reasonable doubt. The burden is on the state. Your mind has to rest easy as to these issues. The computer activity, and it seems like the state's case is like a shifting, whatever might work. Let's throw something out there and see if it sticks. There's no strangulation, let's suggest that. The tire, the nails, the screws in the tire at an angle. Somebody did that with a screwdriver. We have no proof or possibility or like screws found, and even their own experts said that. The computer stuff, you'll have to listen and see who you believed about, and the cell phone. I thought that Mr. Williams held up very good in his questioning with the prosecutor when prosecutor asked him and confronted about why he makes his opinions. And it's possible if you leave and there's no activity, there could be periods where it doesn't show on a tower. But you see the long video from the investigator with the DA's office. You see this big arc and map suggesting going down to Bledsoe Cemetery and then possibly other locations. It doesn't add up. Now, a few more things. How am I doing on time, Judge? All right. I'll try not to take it all. All right. Some of the witnesses, his neighbors, they didn't hear anything that night. They didn't see anything out of the ordinary that night. And so there's nothing to indicate a tire that is flat that is being driven is loud. The lady that lived on down the road that was in her barn that said she heard it. In her interview, it indicated that she lived like in a little bowl area. She thought it might come down I think what she says, the Harness Road. She wasn't sure. I asked her, did you look? Why would I look out the window at night? And then she later said, I looked out the door. She didn't see anything. She may have heard a noise. I asked her the question, did you call the police? And she said, probably. or I usually call the police, but her interview was from several years later. I don't know, but the witnesses on the street didn't hear anything out of the ordinary. The passcodes and the user codes on her stuff, there's no proof that David knew those because she changed them. The Swift children, what they had to say, and in the days and years after this, how they've pulled together and he's raised them as a family, and they didn't see any signs of a disturbance in the house or around the house. The course of the investigation from 2011 until he was charged in 2022, things were done, a lot of things were done early on. After a while, less things got done. For whatever reason, a lot of things got stirred up by media or these people writing books and things of that nature. Sometimes when things are going on, there's pressure to do something, pressure. And pressure sometimes causes a reaction and choices to be made. We disagree with the choice to prosecute David Swift. He pleads not guilty to this. I don't know what happened, but there is no proof to support the state's theory in this case. You have heard all of my questions. You have heard all of the witnesses. The state said that this was a puzzle that they would put together for a complete picture. There is no complete picture. It's an incomplete picture, or there's things that are just not there. We ask you to find him not guilty of these charges. And I thank you for your time and attention.